Таков опыт Любляны. Следующая история, которая мне лично чрезвычайно интересна, связана с еще одной идеей, институцией. Это доклад Lina țăuverović, который называется «Архив как политический акт». Кому, как не нам, углубляться в вопросы архивного коллекционирования. И мы сейчас услышим этот очень интересный ракурс темы, который нам представит аспирант образовательной программы галереи Тейт и Королевского колледжа искусств, заместитель куратора фонда Culver 22 из Лондона, Lina țăuverović. Пожалуйста.
Hi. Trust my luck to be the last one of the whole conference. So I'm going to make it quite short, so don't be scared. We're nearly at the end. And my presentation is really a little bit different. I'm talking about archives, not so much about performance. So first of all, thank you to everyone at Garage for, first of all, organizing this fantastic event. It has been a real pleasure over the past 2 days. And to Snezhana for inviting me and also for taking the time to brief me and explain the context, which is, in the case of what I'm talking about, a little bit related to Garage's own thoughts and plans in relation to archives. So my focus today is really to do with a series that I have been running at the Culver 22 Foundation in London, which just came to an end about a month ago. And it has been running for 2.5 years, and we are now about to begin working on a reader of this event. So the series is entitled Archivist Strategy, Conversations Around Self-Historicization Across the East. And my interest was to connect Culver 22's region of focus, former USSR and Eastern Europe, horizontally, and to attempt to connect different case studies of self-historicization across this region, and by doing so, to, in a way, perform an act of self-historicization myself, inserting these practices into the UK discourse systematically over these 2.5 years. For those of you who are not aware of Culver 22, it is a foundation based in London. In many ways, it has many similarities with Garage. It is a non-for-profit foundation, but has a founder who is actually Russian, and it is the only foundation that is focused on art and culture from the former East, so the only one in the UK. And I really need to, at this point, stress how unique this is, because in the UK, we really don't have that many opportunities to engage with work from this region. It is the case that there are less opportunities than we would think. Somehow, I think the UK tends to be a little bit inward-looking. So you'll notice that most of the images that you're seeing in my presentation are of people or of events within this series, not archives. And this is because I think that the most important part of this project was not to collect and bring over data and objects from one part of the world to another. So it wasn't so much an archival drive, rather it was to open up a mode of thinking and operating amongst our audiences and partners in terms of discussions around historiography. In a sense, the series focused on framing the question, sort of an equivalent of, if we kind of look at feminist history, the equivalent of Linda Nocklin's question, why have there been no great women artists? Which reveals, of course, the discussion around why greatness has been associated with male genius. So in a sense, this series is kind of asking a parallel question, you know, where the artists from the former East on a global map. So if you're given the right tools in a way, it becomes easy to ask the right questions and to find the answers. So this was a series about the historiography of the region. And I'm just showing you some images. The images are really just to illustrate what I'm speaking about, and I try to resist going into projects, specific projects, simply because I think I really wanted to focus this talk on the ethics of archives and the potential, the political potential. What can one do? Both from the artistic perspective and from the perspective of the curator. So the series centered on the ethics of archiving because it looked at what happens to bodies of artistic work, or it could equally be any body of knowledge, at times of precarity, times of turbulence, or simply what happens in places where systematic historicization is not occurring. So these situations of precarity vary. They can range from moments of political change and unrest, wars, sanctions, censorship, or simply, and most frequently, the sheer inability, or in some cases unwillingness, of institutions to do this work. So, be it for economic reasons or capacity reasons, the work of collecting, archiving, and preserving of the artistic local scenes does not happen. So this series, and here I'm showing you some examples of, this is the series website. This is a site that contains all the information on all the videos of the series. So it included around 10 to 12 events, including lectures, seminars, and workshops. This is an example of a curator and academic Zuzana Milewska talking about feminist strategies in the work of Lina țăuverović. And that's an artist we had an exhibition of at the time. So the idea was to depart from historical case studies and look at urgent situations. So at certain moments, the series overall looked at particular case studies, but there were moments, for example, when things were happening with institutions in Hungary, we kind of departed from the historical and invited, in that case, Barnabas Bencsik and an artist called Csaba Nemes, to talk about what was happening in Hungary at that particular moment. Now, I want to just say that this series is very much indebted to a number of, to a historical body of work that has been done in this area. So it follows a long lineage, or plugs into an active body of work that is being done across the region in terms of self-historicization. And this includes, first and foremost, a project called eStart Map, which actually very handily continues from Yuri's presentation, which mentioned Neue Slowenische Kunst and Irvin. This is a very well-known project, I'm sure most of you know it, by the group Irvin, called eStart Map, where they took it upon themselves to deal with this black hole in the canonical history of art, whereby the former East, so all of this region is really a black hole, and you will see another image where this black hole is visualized, and to begin to map through collaborations with curators across the region, as well as works by, this is an example of one artist within the eStart Map, works by artists, for example, Lina ță uverović, who systematically archived and collected the artistic outputs in Romania. So her work shifted from art with her body to the research of the body of international art. So very much looking at this notion of self-historicization. So through setting up the Contemporary Art Archive Center for Art Analysis in her own studio, a non-institutional space. Obviously, there are many projects like this. For example, I know that artist Vadim Zakharov has been working in this way as well. So really, this series was very much about looking at what happens when artists step into the roles of historians, curators, archivists, and how we can activate these bodies of knowledge. It also, these are just some examples of other projects that are kind of within this lineage. The series really picks up from the excellent work that has been done by curators such as Natasha Petroshin-Bachelet, who actually opened the series in London. This is an example of the black hole in art history over our region. Works by Natasha Petroshin, who wrote for Reflux Journal in 2010 on innovative forms of archives, as well as the work of Zdenka Badovinac at Moderna Galeria in Ljubljana, in particular the exhibition Interrupted Histories in 2006, in which Badovinac not only exhibited works which engaged with their context, but also, and I really like this way of positioning it, also offered these works as instruments for new processes in historicizing art. So here's a quote from Zdenka Badovinac. So she says, because the local institutions that should have been systematizing neo-avant-garde art and its tradition either did not exist or were disdainful of such art. The artists themselves were forced to be their own art historians and archivists, a situation that still exists in some places today. Such self-historicization includes the collecting and archiving of documents, whether one's own art actions or in certain spaces, of broader movements, ones that were usually marginalized by local politics and invisible in the international art context. So as another example, so essentially my strategy with this, and this is very much in response to the kind of conversations over email I have been having with Snezhana about active archives. My strategy was really to, in a way, extend these efforts and in another step of self-historicization by actively and actually quite aggressively insert these narratives into the UK artistic landscape. So I have been living in the UK for a very long time, and at a certain point you begin to wonder about the writing of histories and to kind of feel a little bit like, well, now let's hear about my history. So it was very much this kind of continuation of and that, I think, for me, the kind of ethics of this kind of work does come down to personal responsibility, and I really want to stress the notion of the subjective in this kind of work. So we began to map these kind of practices, and here's a quote from curator Yulia Sorokina from Kazakhstan, who, as part of the series, I conducted a series of interviews. So Yulia, just to follow on from the Zdenka Badovinac quote, says, first of all, you're absolutely right. So I'm asking her about the kind of who is archiving, who is doing this work, and she talks about, so she says, first of all, you're absolutely right. We have no museums, no archival institution, no galleries even, only a few enthusiastic people who try to do these things, archive works. That is why our movement is so family-oriented or tribe-oriented. For over 20 years now, we have had no support at all, and the work in question has already passed into history. Actually, we had the Soros Center for Contemporary Art for 10 years, and then she goes on to talk about quite specific reasons why this work was not happening. So I kind of really try to create connections, and in a way to kind of begin to draw a map, and this is something that we will be continuing to do with the reader. So the series mimicked a number of elements of the projects it presented. It demanded inclusion in the canon, and its tactics were to occupy spaces, opportunities, and affiliations. So I should add at this point that when we began this series, Calvert 22 was a very young organization. Calvert has only been around for 4 years, and the work of Calvert 22 was not really in a place to be doing this kind of work. It was very much about exhibiting. So this was, and what I'm interested in here is that personal responsibility of bringing in alternative histories and asking these questions continuously. So we very quickly partnered up with a Courtauld, with UCL Art History Department, so it was very much about really kind of infiltrating with these histories, and I think over a period of time it is important to kind of do this work systematically. In terms of working with material and gradual acquisition of knowledge, the series remained open-ended and developed organically, something that I would actually, that I see as its strength. So it very much included its audiences. So it was very much about, so for example, within about 3 months, a number of people that were coming to the series became active participants by becoming an editorial group in the online part of it. So my interest lies in the full loop of working with archives. As Derrida says in Archive Fever, the archivization produces as much as it records the event. And it is this dual function that I think yields the power to be political. So the interest in self-historicization project is in seeking out ways of activating bodies of knowledge in site-specific and time-specific ways in order to activate them and give them new potency in the context of the particular conditions that surround them. So in a sense, this notion of the archive speaking back. So of kind of thinking of performing archives, of making them into something that becomes much more about the people and really taking on the work of making them current and making them live. So if we can think of an archive as a charged site, charged in the sense that no aspect of it is arbitrary, so carrying a trace of the omissions of so what is missing from it. What was at the center of series is, I think, already obvious, is this agency of these individuals, so the artists within these projects, some of whom I mentioned, and the notion of subjectivity. And I can't stress enough how important the giving yourself the license to be subjective in the creation and the development of archives is. So in many cases, the archive becomes a site of resistance against politically motivated forms of amnesia, or it can become a site of empowerment. So for me, the question of ethics often comes down to the question of historiography and the drive to return to a particular moment or a body of knowledge and to challenge it, or if we connect it to what we heard yesterday to map it against what Simon Critchley was talking about, this personal experience of injustice and the demand and approval. So kind of taking this upon yourself. So the drive to use the spaces of culture to revisit particular moments. And I'm just now going, so these are just examples. So again, this is Susanna. This is a curator from Ljubljana, Saša Nabregoj, talking about Mladen Stilinović's work. Again, members of Irvin. This is, and Neue Slovenische Kunst, Zdenka Badovinac in the middle. Jelena Vesic from Belgrade, talking about Student Cultural Center in Belgrade. So the drive is to use the spaces of culture to revisit particular moments, which usually tend to be remembered only through memories recorded by official narratives, which we know are only one very particular official side of the story. So what I'm trying to get at here is what Derrida terms not just a sheltering of the past, but an anticipation of the future, because the inclusions and exclusions are political acts. Thank you.